Dogworks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dogworks. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by First Paw Coffee Company, specializing in private label premium blend coffee. If you're serious about coffee, you should check it out. First Paw Coffee's passion is high-quality, small batch roasted coffee. They take the extra time to taste and get everything perfect before they release new blends. They aim to bring you a cup of happiness each time you pour yourself some coffee. Find out more at ak.dog/free and enter for a chance to win some First Paw Coffee prizes, a book from our collection, and tote bag. One winner will be selected at random each month. That's ak.dog/free.
Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Robert Forto, and you're listening to Mushing Radio here on KVRF 89.7 in the Mat-Su Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site, and you can find all of our episodes on dogworksradio.com. And we've added a search bar on Dogworks Radio, so if you're looking for one of our past interviews, whether it be one of the mushers, for example, Didi Gendreau or Martin Bucer or one of the CVs, just type their name on the sidebar there and their interview will pop up, as well as topics that we've talked about. We've talked about just about everything Iditarod and mushing related, so there should be an episode for you. Also, follow us on social media channels by searching Dogworks Radio. And calling in today from Southern California is our co-host, Alex Stein. Alex, how's it going today?
It's going really well, Robert. I'm starting to get excited. We're here in 2020 now, which seems crazy, but here we are, and coming up not too far in the future now is the Iditarod. So there's a lot of stuff happening, and I know that we're going to talk a little bit later about you are kind of in a deep freeze up there in Willow and in a lot of Alaska right now. So it's getting to look a lot like sled dog season.
It is, and we're recording this on the 10th of January, and as we speak, the Copper Basin is getting ready to start, and it's bitterly cold up that way. I think they had temperatures of about minus 38 the other day, and I know that the K300, the Kuskokwim 300 sled dog race happens next weekend. It's not as cold over there in Bethel, but it's chilly everywhere, and I know we're going to talk about that towards the end of the show, but it has been a brutal couple of weeks. It has not been this cold since I've been here in 2010. So, yes, it is quite chilly. Today we're going to do something that I think is well needed, especially for a lot of our longtime listeners. We're going to talk about what to do and how to watch Iditarod when you're up here in Alaska. And I know that you've been up here several times as not only a fan, but also as a host here of the show, but also doing your documentary. And of course, I've been a part of it not only as a handler for a couple of mushers, but I've been in the trenches, so to speak, with a lot of folks, especially at the restart and the ceremonial start. And of course, I've been a fan many times where I'll travel downtown and go over to the restart on snow machines and all of that. So that's what we're talking about today. And Alex, I know you have a schedule in front of you, and this is not just about the ceremonial start where everybody shows up on Saturday. There's a lot of stuff happening before and, of course, even afterwards when the restart happens on Sunday. So let's start on what we call Iditarod Week. What is the first thing that you would do if you're coming up to Alaska and you wanted to get that Iditarod experience? And let's start with, you arrive into Anchorage. You're getting off the airplane. Where are you going? Are you renting a car? Where do you want to stay? Where are you going to get that first meal when you arrive up here? What are you going to do as that fan of Iditarod?
So there's a lot of stuff to do, and a lot of different places to stay. I know a lot of people like to stay at the lakefront, which is the sort of Iditarod headquarters hotel, which is very close to the airport. If you're staying there, you may or may not need to rent a car. It's I believe there are shuttle services that'll take you there, or you can take a cab or an Uber there. That's also a place where a lot of volunteers stay, because that is where the dogs are brought back, and so there are a lot of people who do volunteering as dog handlers. And I'm not sure what it is, but I know that there is always a special rate available for Iditarod volunteers at the lakefront during that week. There are lots and lots of different places to stay. There's three basic areas. There's sort of the Spinard area, which is near the airport, which is where the lakefront is, and there are a bunch of hotels there. Some are very nice, some are perhaps less so. And then there's a lot of hotels in sort of the Midtown area. There's a whole cluster of hotels down there. If you're going to stay in Midtown, you're either going to want to have a car, I would say, or you're going to want to count on taking a lot of Ubers or taxis. And then there's downtown, and downtown is the area near where the Start is, and there are a lot of hotels there. Some of the really, really nice and very expensive hotels are there. There are also some hotels that are maybe a little bit dodgy and very inexpensive. And so I would kind of be careful, read reviews, read Yelp reviews, ask people who've been up here what their opinions are if you're thinking about staying at a particular place. This also is a good time to be making those reservations, because a lot of these places will get booked up and will sell out, and then you might be forced to stay at some place that was a lot more expensive. And I've noticed also in the past couple of years that in addition to all of the hotels and motels and bed and breakfasts around, a lot of people are doing Airbnb. So you can stay at an Airbnb somewhere in Anchorage, and again, those are, you want to make sure that you're staying in an area that's relatively safe. It's Anchorage is not a dangerous city in the sense that some really large, cities that have a lot of violent crime are, but it still is a fairly big city. So you want to just be aware of that. You want to make sure that you're staying as safe as you can. So those are some of the places that you can stay. There are a lot of great restaurants and brew pubs and places to go in Anchorage. And although people from outside tend to think of Anchorage as sort of a provincial place, it's a pretty large city. I think it's a city of 350 or 400,000 people. So there is a lot of stuff that you can do, and especially in the last 15 years or so, the amount of diversity of what you can find in terms of different types of restaurants has really, and the quality of restaurants has really, really improved. So there's just a lot of stuff to do and a lot of places to go.
So earlier you learned about First Paw Coffee Company, and now I'm going to tell you about its Tail Wagger Blend. First Paw Coffee Company's Tail Wagger Blend is their first offering, and its name and label were crowdsourced from their Facebook fans. How cool is that? The Tailwagger blend is a private label premium blend that was developed just for them. It is a medium roast from Colombian beans with tastes of Brazil nuts, grapefruit, and oak. Be sure to go to ak.dog/free and enter to win a bunch of cool prizes. That's ak.dog/free.
So before we get into the dinner that they have right after the restart, or the ceremonial start, I know that that's sort of a tradition here. But is there any place where you like to go when you come into town that is just a must-have place to go to eat when you're up in Alaska?
I like, I think it's called the Glacier Brew House, which is right downtown. I like that a lot. I've had really, really great food there. I'm very partial to the Snow City Cafe, which is right in downtown on either 4th or 5th Street. And they have amazing breakfasts there, so I always try to go there when I'm in town. And then there are a lot of chain restaurants now, so people can get things that are kind of familiar. I like to ask locals where they go and choose those sort of places because I find them just a little bit more interesting than, you can go to an Olive Garden anywhere in the world. So if you're up in Alaska, I don't think that going to the Olive Garden is the best thing to do.
Right. So let's go back to renting a car. And I know the next events during Iditarod week are spread out a little bit. And, Anchorage is not necessarily a public transportation friendly place. They do have taxis and buses, and Ubers aren't like they are in, the big cities where you can hail one at just about a moment's notice. And I know that you often rent a car when you come up, in particular, so you can go up to the restart, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. So your advice, would you rent a car, yes or no?
I would, and especially if you're going with a group of people or with a couple of people, you can share the cost of doing that. And I just like to be able to get around and go and see friends and things like that. So I usually do. I don't think it's necessary to do so. And in fact, when you're going up to the restart, they have buses that go up to the restart that leave from the lakefront, and I think possibly from other hotels in Anchorage, and that's a little bit more convenient because it's when you get up to the restart, it's fairly expensive to park in. They have this gigantic lot that they put aside for people to park in who come to the restart, and I believe that is $15 to park, $10 or $15, and it's just more convenient to take the bus, and then someone else is doing the driving, and you can just sort of relax. And then at the end of the day, you don't have to fight all of the traffic. And at the end of the restart, the traffic coming out of Willow is always really, really bad, often all the way until you get into Wasilla. So, on a day without traffic, you could maybe make that drive in, 45 minutes. But when there is traffic, sometimes it's a couple of hours.
Yeah, I only live about 5 miles from Willow Lake where the restart is, and I made the mistake of driving down there a few years ago, and it took me 2.5 hours to get home, and I'm only, like I said, 5 miles or so from that. So let's go back to that Iditarod week, and I want to see when the perfect time to come up. And the reason I say that is the week before, in particular the weekend before, is the Fur Rondy. And there's a heck of a lot of stuff going on. There's a carnival. There's the Miners and Trappers Ball. There's all sorts of events happening, including the Fur Rondy sled dog race, which is a sprint race that's been running since, I believe, the 50s, if I'm not mistaken. Otherwise, all of the Iditarod stuff kicks off that week in between, and then the Fur Rondy is going on the same weekend as the Iditarod start and restart. As a fan, when is the best time to come up? What are your thoughts on that?
I think for most people, you would want to come up either on Tuesday or Wednesday before the race. And the reason for that is that a lot of the flights that come into Anchorage from places that are fairly far away will get in relatively late at night or early in the morning. So it's not unusual when I fly up there that I will get in at like, the earliest is usually like 10 p.m. and sometimes it's 1 or 2 in the morning. So if you come in on Wednesday, that means that you'll be there on Thursday, and there's a lot of stuff that happens on Thursday. There's a musher meet and greet at the big Denini Center, and then there's the musher banquet where they draw the starting numbers on Thursday evening, and that is a big. Those two are big fan events, and you can meet a lot of people who are up there from all over the world, and you can at the musher meet and greet you can get a chance to actually meet and have conversations with and spend a small amount of time with each one of the mushers. And so people will go and they will bring things for the mushers to sign. And it's just a really cool part of Iditarod that you don't get in most other major sports, where you actually have a chance to have one-on-one time with all of the participants. Also on Thursday there is a mandatory musher meeting, which is at the lakefront, and although that is not open to the public, a lot of times fans will sort of gather around there, and there's a chance to run into people and to run into mushers, and that's kind of an exciting thing. And then on Friday there's a big speaker event at the lakefront put on by Iditarod, where they have speakers, people who've written books, sometimes mushers who have interesting stories to tell, or people who have interesting stories to tell about Iditarod, and that is a very fun event as well. In addition, there are a lot of people who are gathered who sort of have informal lunches or dinner parties or things like that, and so there's always a chance that you will, just by being there and walking around, you will run into lots and lots of people. And every time I'm there at the lakefront, I find that I get invited to like 3 or 4 different events that all seem to be happening at the same time. So, it's hard to do everything, but there's a lot of stuff that's going on. And just by being there, you'll be in the position to, to find out about all of this stuff.
So, Alex, let's go back to Thursday and to the banquet, which is held over at the Denini Center. I think you had mentioned that there. First off, that's a paid event, and I believe that the tickets are pretty expensive for that, and they do sell out. It's not something you can usually walk up to and get a ticket for that event at the same time. And the way that that's broken down is everybody's kind of mingling like you would any type of event like that, and the mushers typically are in kind of in a long table around the banquet hall, and they will sign autographs, as you mentioned, and do all of that. And then after dinner is where they do the mushers draw. Can you tell us just a little bit about that, and then we'll proceed on over to the ceremonial start?
Yeah. So they what they do is they put names in numbers in a mukluk, which is like a native fur boot, basically. And the mushers will draw starting numbers from the mukluk in the order that they entered the Iditarod. So the first person who signed up for Iditarod will pick first, and then they go through, and that's how the starting order is decided. Banquet, they have things that are being auctioned. So there's a lot of commerce that goes on at this event. So there's usually bottles of wine that have names of mushers on it, and then a lot of the sponsors will donate prizes specifically to be auctioned off at the banquet. And so there's a lot of that. There's people visiting with fans who come up every year, who are all gathered around in this big banquet hall, and it's a chance to come and say hello to people that you only see usually like once or twice a year.
So let's talk about Saturday. It's what we call the Alaskan Circus. It's a crazy day down in downtown Anchorage, and all of the festivities that are going on there. I want to break this up in just a couple of sections. The first point I want to make is, what do you think about musher accessibility, not only during that week there, but in particular on Saturday? I think a lot of folks think that these folks are, they can just come up and hang out with for hours on end, and because they become real close to them on social media in particular. So what do you think about throughout the week, and then of course on Saturday, about musher accessibility? Is it prevalent, and is it possible?
Yeah, it's definitely possible, and each musher has his or her preference for how much contact they want with the public, and usually on Friday, because there aren't a lot of official events, Friday afternoon and Friday evening, there are different mushers will sometimes hold events for their fans at local stores or shops, and I believe Jeff King and Mitch Seavey usually do an event at the Inlet Towers Hotel, which is sort of near downtown. So it's definitely possible to get close to them coming up to the race. Now on Saturday, they put up fencing, and there's staging areas all around the streets near 4th Street, and the mushers will get assigned a place to go and park their dog trucks, and they will come in with their handlers and with their helpers. And then inside that fence area, the only people who can get in are Iditarod volunteers. So there are, most teams, they'll have, maybe a couple of their handlers who are just working for them. And then often teams will have a few Iditarod volunteers who are assigned to help them on the ceremonial start. So those people are allowed inside the fenced-in area, but the general public isn't. Now, if you know where the musher is that you're rooting for, you can usually go up to the fence, and if they are around, they will often come and say hi to people. But they are really preparing for the race, and even though the ceremonial start is only 12 miles, and there are Iditaroders, and it's more of a carnival atmosphere, it's still something that they are having to prepare for, and they're doing their final preparations and plans for how they're going to run the real race starting on Sunday. So you can't just walk up to a musher and necessarily have a conversation with them on Saturday. But what I have found, which is really fascinating to me, is that on Friday night, because the first part of the ceremonial start is run on the streets in downtown Anchorage, they bring in snow. They bring in dozens of dump trucks filled with snow and put them on the streets downtown, and then have plows that come up and sort of smooth the snow over so that the dogs can run on the snow. So I'm always fascinated by when they bring the snow in. And then on Saturday, there are, in a very short space, there will be, probably close to or more than 1,000 dogs there. And I believe right now we're looking at 57 teams who are signed up to run. So it's a lot of people, it's a lot of dogs, it's a lot of excitement. And then each team has an Iditarider who has paid in an auction to ride on either in the to ride in the sled basket usually of the team as they go on the first 12 miles.
And of course, I cannot say more importantly enough is you need to arrive early. They close off all the streets. It's very difficult to find parking. It's difficult to get around during the early morning of the ceremonial start. I believe the mushers begin to arrive at around 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, and as you mentioned, they park on the side streets leading into that main chute there, and of course, starting there on their way. So this next question is really about how close you want to be, and there's all sorts of answers to this, and I know you've been to a bunch of different places. Where is your favorite spot to catch the ceremonial start?
So when you're right at the very starting line, there are tons and tons of people. And it always fascinates me that you are just packed in for the first couple of blocks. But if you go just 3 or 4 blocks away, there you can get right up to the fence and you can be very, very close, and there just aren't a lot of people there. So I like the excitement of the very start, but I prefer being somewhere where there aren't quite as many people. And I think my favorite place is the big curve, the big turn at Cordoba Street, and that's a very interesting place because we've seen every year we see like 1 or 2 people who wipe out going around that curve. Jeff King sort of very famously did and almost wiped out, I think, last year. And so that's just a fun place to be. If you go into a little bit further down in the trail, if you go into the woods in the Greenbelt area, there are always people who are having trailgate parties where they have. Some people will have barbecues, they'll cook hot dogs and things, and they're giving out food to the mushers and the Iditariders as they're going past, and it's a real fun party atmosphere. And I also like being at the Campbell Airstrip, which is the end of the ceremonial start route, because when people come there, they've been through all of these different places in Anchorage, and they've been surrounded by people who love sled dog racing and love the Iditarod. And even though the mushers and their teams have a lot of work to do before they start out on the race the next day, people have been through this amazing, overwhelmingly positive experience, and they're just really, really happy when they get there. And usually the Iditariders, especially if it's their first time as an Iditarider, are just absolutely thrilled and have had the time of their lives. So I like all of those places, and I realize that I may have named nearly every place that you can be during the ceremonial start, but there's just a lot of great places to be. My recommendation for people is to find one place and then to be there for a while and watch a bunch of the teams go by, and then walk, or if you can, drive or take an Uber or a taxi to another part so that you get a taste of more than one section of the ceremonial start.
Yeah, another good spot, just to stay on that for just a second, there's a parking garage right there at the start. And if you can get up high there, on that top floor or just 1 or 2 below, you can get a bird's eye view of all the teams that are heading out onto the ceremonial start, and that's always fun. So on Saturday night, typically the mushers, it's all business. A lot of times there's not a lot of meet and greets happening. Typically it's spending time with their families and their dogs and last-minute preparations and getting ready to go. So I would urge folks that are visiting, if they don't have plans already, to just consider that a downtime for them. But real quickly on Saturday, so we can move over to Sunday, there is I guess it's a rather formal get-together now with a bunch of of the hardcore fans at Gwynny's Restaurant. I know that you've been involved with that a few times. What happens during that afternoon lunch/dinner?
Oh, it's there's just a lot of people who have been who are Iditarod fans and have been coming there year after year. And it's not an official event, but it's sort of a chance for people to come and see their friends and see people who are serious Iditarod fans from all over the world, who don't see each other in person very often, but it's a nice chance to get together and have some time and some conversations with these people, because as you mentioned, there's not a lot going on officially on Saturday night. So and I know that there also are sometimes other fans will have parties or get-togethers for friends who are in from out of town, and so it's a really good opportunity to sort of get a chance to spend time with other people who are as enthusiastic about Iditarod as you are.
So on Sunday, the restart starts at 2 p.m. sharp. It starts at 10 a.m. on Saturday. So it's about an hour and a half on a good day driving up to Willow. You had suggested taking the shuttle bus, which I would probably do if I was downtown as well. But again, you can drive up. There is parking, as you mentioned. It's $10 or $15, and then you're there at the restart. Let's talk about that. They're going out in the same order as they did the day before. It takes about 2.5 hours or so because they're leaving at every 2-minute intervals, starting with the first musher all the way back to the last. What do you suggest people are doing on Sunday? Where do you like to sit, or you won't be sitting? Where would you like to stand? Can you interact with the mushers? What is the vibe? What is the environment like, etc.?
So again, there's a fenced off sort of backstage area, which is only open to the media and to volunteers. The media are sort of kicked out at 1 o'clock. So the last hour is just the mushers and the handlers getting ready to go out. And there is, when you go across Willow Lake, there's a path that's sort of fenced off, and the dog teams go down the middle of that path, and people can be against the fence on either direction. I like to go out past Willow Lake and go onto one of the next couple of lakes. There are, again, you still have a lot of people there, but it starts to be not quite as congested, if you will, there. And again, on these other lakes, people will have barbecues, people will have parties, and it is a really fun atmosphere. Also, once you get past that first lake, there's a sort of chute, a mild downhill chute, maybe 10 or 15 feet going downhill, but it's a great chance to get really good photographs of teams as they're coming down there. And a lot of photographers will set up down there at the beginning of that second lake. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that in addition to the shuttles from Anchorage, there is parking available in Wasilla at the Wasilla High School, and also in Houston. So you can go and park there, and then take a school bus shuttle, which I think is only a couple of bucks to come up to Willow if you don't want to bring your car all the way up to Willow Lake.
So the first checkpoint is Yetna Station. It's about 35 miles from the restart there in Willow. And I know a lot of people have aspirations of getting out to that first checkpoint, whether they're going by snow machine or plane or whatever. You made that trip last year, Alex, for the first time on snow machine. Is that something you would recommend?
If I could, I think it's probably a lot. It's not depending on the trail, it can be really, really bumpy. There were a lot of berms when we were going up last year, and that was, I confess, very hard on me. So, I know that there are trips where people will fly in small planes up to some of the early checkpoints, and those are very expensive trips. But if you are interested and have the time and money to do that, I would recommend doing that.
Excellent. So let's finish up here relatively quickly. And I know we've talked about this portion on numerous occasions, but of course, let's give them that full fan experience. A lot of folks fly up to Nome from Anchorage. Typically, the winners are coming in about 9 or 10 days from that restart day. So about Tuesday or Wednesday of the following week, they're going to start arriving in Nome. Would you suggest folks stay the extra week or so, almost 2 weeks, I guess, and make that trip up to Nome for the finish? Or what are your thoughts on that, in particular for that first-time fan?
Yeah, there are not many hotels in Nome, so there's a limited supply of hotel rooms. You can also, usually the Nome Chamber of Commerce will help you if you want to get placed in a private home. A lot of people will rent out rooms or let you rent out their sofa to you or something like that. If you want to go to Nome, I would very strongly suggest planning it a long time in advance. I think it's a little bit dicey if people listening to this now who are thinking of going up to Nome and haven't done any sort of planning for it. The hotels fill up very, very quickly. It is very exciting when the winter comes in and there will be thousands of people out on the street. It is for me just as exciting to be there when some of the later mushers come in, and it's amazing to me that there will be a couple thousand people out to greet the winner, but then when you get to maybe someone who's coming in 15th or 16th place, there will be a much, much smaller crowd. And it is, I say all the time that it is just as impressive to me from a fan's perspective for someone who finishes the Iditarod, no matter what place they're in. So I think it's in a way even more exciting and more meaningful to be there when the middle of the Packers or the back of the Packers finish, because this might be the only time that they're going to run and finish Iditarod. And I'm sure that it means an enormous amount to Mitch Seavey every time he finishes Iditarod. But if you have someone who's been training and saving all of their life and they know that this is the only time they're going to run Iditarod, there's something very, very emotional about that as well.
Okay, so the last question I have for you on a fan's perspective, and I know I didn't talk to you about this question before we aired, so it might put you on the spot a little bit in terms of figuring it out. But what about budget? I know that you've been coming up here for several years. You've been up here 3 or 4 times since I've lived up here. On a modest travel budget, what should people expect if they're coming up on that Tuesday and they're going to stay through the restart and then fly home, a week or so after they arrive? So they're going to spend a week up in Alaska having that Iditarod experience. What would be a decent budget, or what have you spent in the past on your trips up here, including airfare? You're flying from Los Angeles, so that's going to be comparable to any other Western city, whether it be Denver or Phoenix or Seattle or whatever. What type of budget should people expect?
It really can range from very relatively inexpensive to really, really expensive. But you can get a fairly, you can get a nice hotel room for probably $75 to $125 a night. If you're going to rent a car, I think usually when I've rented a car, it's been in the neighborhood of like $100. So when I've gone up there for like 6 or 7 days, I can usually manage to do it for under $1,000, including everything. But I'm very good about finding relatively cheap airfares. So the airfare is really kind of a wild card. Some years it's much more expensive. Some years it's much less. The rental car or factoring an Uber or something like that is something to take in mind. And then of course there's the cost of meals or souvenirs or whatever it is that you want to get. And again, there are some hotels in Anchorage where you can spend $300 or $350 a night. Most people aren't going to want or need to do that. On the other hand, there are places I've seen in Anchorage that advertise rates as low as $28 a night. But I probably wouldn't want to stay in those places. So, thinking of something that's sort of in the middle, maybe on the lower side of the middle, but is safe, I'd say that you could probably do it for about $1,000.
Yeah, I think that's right on the numbers there. For folks that are thinking about flying up, the two biggest airlines are Delta and Alaska. You can get up here from most places for 20,000 miles each way on Alaska Airlines, which I fly pretty much exclusively. And like you said, it's about probably a good $1,000 will set you up. A question that we get asked all the time, Alex, do you think that things in Alaska are much more expensive than, say, where you live in LA, whether it be food or transportation or Ubers or whatever?
It's interesting because gasoline is very expensive in California. And I'm probably one of the few people who comes up to Alaska and says, oh, gasoline is cheaper here, because it is relatively expensive compared to most of the country, but it's usually cheaper than what it is in Los Angeles. Food can be more expensive. I noticed, and this is I'm not sure how to explain this, but I noticed that in some of the local supermarkets, fruit is actually less expensive in Anchorage than it is in Los Angeles. And I don't know if that's because it's being brought in from Fiji or from somewhere like that, but that was striking to me. Meals out in restaurants are a little bit more expensive than they are here. But again, it depends on what exactly it is that you want. And if you have a budget, you can usually find things that will fit into your budget. It might be, you might not be at a restaurant that is quite as fancy as as it would be in the middle of the country. But I think these days there is a really wide array of things that you can do, and you have a lot of options.
I lied to you, Alex. One last question before we go, and you alluded to a lot of this already. When is the best time to start planning for this? Here we are about 2 months out, almost exactly 2 months out from the start of Iditarod, and you had mentioned that it may be too late for a lot of these places, in particular in Nome. If a person's doing this for the first time, when should they start planning their Iditarod fan trip and experience?
You can never start it too early, but I think that especially for Anchorage, if you want to start looking seriously at this in in September or October, that's probably a good amount of time. You can usually find relatively cheap flights at that time of the year, and the hotels and rental cars are generally really good prices that you can get then. The closer you get, the more you're liable to have the prices go up for you. when it comes to Nome, I would say that really, if you can plan it like a year in advance, that would be good. I know people who've gone up to Nome for the finish, and they've literally planned it like right before or right after Iditarod for the next year. Then again, I also have known a couple of people who've been able to get good deals to Nome on either using airline miles or something else, who have literally planned it, like a month in advance. But I would definitely not recommend that.
So there is your fan experience for Iditarod. I know, Alex, that we alluded to talking about mushing in the extreme cold. Let's do that real quickly. We're at about 45 minutes in, and I know folks are probably looking at their watches as they're listening to this. I know you had a question for me from a musher's perspective. What is that?
Yeah, so I have once been in 40 degree below zero temperatures, and my takeaway from that is that it is literally hard to breathe when it's 40 below. And I was not outside for very long, and I was covered up, and I was dressed in layers, and I had, scarves and warm hats and face coverings and all of that. But I'm wondering, when you are going out to do a run, and it is and it's 30 below or 40 below, how do you approach that in terms of how you're dressed and in terms of, extra care that you need to take for the dogs?
That's a great question. The coldest temperature I've ever been in on a dog team has been minus 36 degrees, and that was doing a run from Willow Lake to Yentna Station, that first series of checkpoints there on Iditarod, and it was cold. It was very cold, and in the last couple of weeks, it's been hovering in the minus 20 to minus 30 degree temperatures up here, and that's some of the coldest temperatures I've seen for this amount of time since I moved up in 2010, and I know a lot of my mushing friends are saying it as well. They're saying, "Wow, it's pretty dang cold." We take a heck of a lot of precautions with the dogs at this temperature. A lot of folks are not even running their dogs now because it's just so cold. Unless you're training for Iditarod or a race or an expedition or something like that, I would probably advise to hold off until it warms up just a little bit. And we've talked a lot on this show that optimal temperature where dogs are really firing all cylinders. And that's about 10 degrees above to about 10 degrees below. That's when you're really going to see the best results out of your dogs, and you're going to have a much more comfortable time doing it. What I find, Alex, is I tend to wear the same thing, whether it's 20 degrees or minus 20 degrees. I tend to run a little bit warmer than a lot of people. I'll wear maybe an extra layer underneath, or I'll wear my big overmitts. I have some beaver overmitts or a seal hat or whatever that I'll wear. But I tend to run with the same thing, and I know a lot of people are much different than that. I know that last year Blair Braverman put a short video up on her, I don't know if it's Facebook or Twitter, about her getting dressed on camera, and boy, she put on a heck of a lot of clothing that time. I'm sure you saw that video of all the stuff that a musher can wear out on the trail, and it can get quite a lot, and it can be quite expensive to dress in that manner. In terms of the dogs, as I mentioned, there is a heck of a lot more care that you have to think about. In particular, with the male dogs, you need to cover up their private parts. It's really easy for male dogs to get frostbite, and we use what we call foxtails on the dog coats, where it's typically wolverine or wolf fur that is covering up that private parts of their area, because there is nothing more painful for a dog, I believe, than having frostbite on the private parts. One other thing that is of concerning, and this happened just to one of our dogs just the other day, 2 days ago. It was brutally cold outside, and we were feeding dinner. And most sled dogs will scarf down their meal in just a matter of seconds. and one of our dogs, Chief, who is an exceptional sled dog, comes from the Brenda Mackey lines and is just an all-around hardy dog. And I saw him eat his meal real quick, and then all of a sudden he started sniffling really, really bad. And I thought, wow, he got some of the liquid down his nose or whatever. But very quickly he had a really bad nosebleed. And I rushed him into the house and let him calm down. And what had happened, I assume, is he had inhaled some liquid relatively quickly, and that really cold temperature just did a number on that sensitive area in his nose, and we had to bring him in and get the bleeding to stop. And of course, he's fine now, and he's down there with all of his buddies. But that is something that we did not expect at these really cold temperatures. So it's something we have to watch out for. And in terms of being on the trail when it is that cold outside, motivation goes down with the dogs, and you have to do snacks more often because they're burning much more calories. Often you have to use more booties, and of course I talked about the coats and the foxtails and all of that. But sled dogs are a remarkable breed. It's not your golden retriever that's sitting there with you that is refusing to go out into the backyard to do his business. These guys love to be outside, and even though that my dog Chief had that pretty good nosebleed, he did not want to be in the warm house. He was standing there at the front door ready to get the heck out of here. He did not want to be in this 65-degree heat wave that he saw when he came inside. He wanted to be down there with his buddies. Does that answer your question, Alex?
It does. I have just one quick follow-up. I know that a lot of times people think about just dressing in layers and wanting to keep warm, but what is the for your first layer? So your long johns, your first shirt that's on. What type of material should that be? Because I think you want it to be able to wick, and so that if there's perspiration, that you won't have that freezing and making you colder rather than warmer.
That's a great question, Alex. One of my good friends, Miranda, who was my handler last year, she always tells me that cotton kills, and she's from this new school generation where everything is smart wool and all that. And I'll be the first to say that I've been in some of the coldest temperatures at least in the country, and been in some pretty dire situations, and I wear cotton every day, and it definitely hasn't killed me yet. So I'm probably not the best person to ask, but what most people wear is that smart wool or fleece layer as that base layer. Then they'll build up from there. And the key, just like anytime you're doing anything in the outdoors, you want to have that ability to take off or put on layers. So whether you're having that first layer of fleece or smart wool, then you'll build up and have some type of sweatshirt or hoodie or something underneath that. Then you'll build up from there to your really heavy duty parka with the ruff and the goose down or whatever you're wearing, and you're looking like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Band real quickly for sure. Anything else before close?
I think you've covered it. At least given us a really good sense of it. And I think that's something that maybe we can get into in more detail at some future show as well.
Excellent. So folks that are listening, we are heading into the mushing season, and we will be on the air. We typically do a 2-week schedule, so that's hopefully the plan. As we head into Iditarod, then we'll do our daily Iditarod coverage, and we will go all the way through the race from the first days of the leading up to ceremonial, then all the way through the finishers banquet about 2 weeks later. That's the highlight of our mushing show for the year, and I'm looking forward to doing that with Alex again this year. Make sure you follow us on social media. Just search for DogWorks Radio, and you can find all of our episodes, as I mentioned at the top of the show, at dogworksradio.com. And stay tuned. We have a really cool teaser that we're going to come out with in the next week or so about our lead up to Iditarod, and that will drop in your inbox if you do subscribe to this show, DogWorks Radio. Alex, it is a pleasure. Thank you for your expertise on the fans' perspective of following Iditarod. We'll talk again soon, okay?
All right. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you. On behalf of my co-host, Alex Stein, this is Robert Forto for Mushing Radio. We'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.
This episode of the podcast is sponsored by First Paw Coffee Company. Learn more at firstpaw.coffee.
From DogWorks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for DogWorks Radio.